Okay, well, this is a workshop, and as you know, we retained Fred Ware to do a zoning diagnostic report, and we've given you the updates over the months that he's been involved. Hi, Judy, come on in, we're just now getting started. And one of the components was conversations with stakeholders, and this is according to Fred's plans. And those, many of those have been conducted, and Fred can speak further to that as he chooses, but I know there's a variety of planning and zoning guys, BZA guys, talked to me, had extensive conversations with Barry, Eric Sugarman from the legal aspect of it. I think there's some other community stakeholders, done some touring, etc. And so, I won't say it's the final piece, but one of the pieces was also then to have that conversation with members of council. And it could have been done one-on-one, but I suggested maybe we get everybody together and do it collectively here. And so that being the case, I mean, for purposes of the public, this is just a workshop, a discussion. And I'm going to turn it over here to Fred in a minute, let him run it like he's run the other interviews. We certainly want to be open and transparent and made sure that, given the fact that we had the group together, that we treated it as a public meeting. Strictly speaking, under the law, we probably could have done it otherwise because we're not here to make decisions, but really there wasn't any equivocation in that regard. As soon as we put this together, I notified, we put the notices, I put the notices on there for public meeting, and we're happy that people will be able to sit in on that. So that's the situation. And with that, Fred, I'll turn it over to you.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor. The Mayor said is I'm trying to get as much information as possible before I may put this report together. And I want to get everyone's views about zoning and the zoning code. And I have some questions I want to ask you, and you can ask me questions also. I don't know if you know my background. I retired from public service about a year and a half ago, planning director of Cuyahoga Falls. Prior to that, I was planning director of Barberton. During that time, I also taught planning at the University of Akron, and prior to that, I worked in Southern Ohio. So I've been in Northeast Ohio probably, of my 67 years, I guess now, is probably 62 years I've been in Northeast Ohio. And I know this area pretty good too, living in Barberton for 17 years. And so this city asked me, the mayor and Barry asked me to take a look at our zoning code. We really think that it needs some work, it needs some help. And when I looked at the zoning code originally, it was pretty comprehensive, but when you dig deep into it, you can see that it's a puzzle of different amendments that don't relate to each other. And, we need to make an amendment for cell towers, and it may affect something else we're doing. And so it's a complicated document that does need updating. And so I'll leave it there for now. And so that we know that it needs to be updated. You also have subdivision regulations that are really some county subdivision regulations. So typically cities have their own subdivision regulations or zoning code. And so the subdivision regulations we used when we were a township, and we never updated those. We never made them our own. So I think that's an important thing, is that as a city, you want your subdivision regulations to work in with your zoning code, because they're linked together with what property zone, what type of road should be there, what type of utilities, and so and there hasn't been a lot of subdivisions developed here, but you do need your own subdivision regulations. So what I ended up doing is spending a lot of time reviewing the zoning code. Every time I read any zoning code, it's read that, or what does it relate to? So over the last 3 months, I've been going over it and over it, and every Thursday I meet with Barry and Bill, and the mayor's available, we ask any questions, and the law director, and so we talk things out as I go through it. Also the subdivision plans, I've been reviewing those. I also reviewed the 2004 comprehensive plan, and we have some preliminary results that from the survey that are available on the new one, and I've been able to go through that data, so I'm trying to analyze that data. I've also reviewed BZA applications. And Barry had a good filing system through his zoning certificates, and I was able to see, starting with 2013 to 2022, of all the BZA applications, the same with the planning commission, to see if there's a trend. If you see a lot of variances for a certain type of setback, then you know there's probably something wrong with the code. If you see a lot of conditional use permits, or you see a lot of rezonings, you don't have a lot of rezoning, so that's something. But I'm looking for things that would say that, you know, this area of the code really was changed. And as the mayor mentioned, we're doing interviews with PZA members, other people I have listed here that we talked to, and we're just asking questions. I want to know your views, and that's what we're here today as council people, is what do you think about certain things in the code or processes. And I toured the city just to see, after looking over the BZA variance request and zoning, I wanted to be on the ground and look at these things. And so the goal is to get as much information available, put this in the report, and to allow the city to decide what we will do. And in the report, I'll give several options of how you can amend the code. And so that's what I'm doing. Before I get to my questions, do you have any questions for me?
I guess I wouldn't mind making just a point of clarity to make sure we all understand. We're not talking about a modification or changing of zoning districts or zoning area in any way, shape, or form. We're focusing on the language in the zoning regulation, looking for conflicts, looking for items in the language that don't fit, not changing an area from R1 to.
We're not talking about changing the zoning map. We're talking about the
Right,
codes, the
map.
regulations.
Yeah.
However, if once this process starts, and you say we really need a better zoning district for a certain area, then it would be up to the city to say, okay, do we want to expand that zoning district or expand it down? But no, we're not saying you have to change this map area. Although it could be effective, just to say down the road as you do this, but it's not something that you have to decide on that.
At this point, that's not what you're really.
All I'm doing is I'm giving you my opinion on critiquing the code. So I think with my experience, and not, I don't have a lot of experience. Anybody else been doing the same thing for 4 years, so on the ground, I always tell people, I'm on the ground doing the work. Sometimes you get consultants, and they're Columbus or something, and they're smart, and intelligent, and have these great ideas, but implementing the code. That's always been my job. Is we created a new code in Barberton in 1995, and then Cuyahoga Falls in 2005. And so I learned that sometimes concepts are good, but when you try to implement those concepts, they're not all that good. So my experience of doing that, I think it comes from me to analyze the code and offer recommendations.
So at the end of this process, what will we get from you as far as a deliverable? Will we get something that's like a red line document, something that's got something that shows, maybe highlights the conflicts you see with some information?
I'll report, and I'll mention certain areas that definitely need change, and then conceptually what needs changed. So I won't read all the document, but it'll be clear when you get the document that these are the things that we should change. Then I'll give my recommendations for how we should change these.
Do you have a document? So obviously you've got our zoning code. Yes. Do you have that where you're making notes on it that you could give to us to reflect back to?
I
I just think if we have a report, it'd be helpful to have the actual zoning document as well.
You know, I have
Compare.
highlighted things, but I don't know if it would help you understand when I have notes.
Okay.
So, but I think probably what, and this is up to the mayor, but, you know, once this report comes through, we have a chance to read it, maybe we ought to sit down and talk about it. It's really it's sort of a living document, because you can decide once it's done, is what you want to do. And I think there are some things that are happening that you may want to do something sooner than later.
I think it would also be nice to get Barry's prioritization from your report. We're not zoning experts, you know, to get Barry Bill, to say, look, this is important, this has an impact right away. These things we can talk about, but they're not as urgent. I think that would be beneficial in the process.
And a good part, Jack, is Fred and I have actually identified that. I mean, we have some areas that we think we need to zero in first. You know, I think Fred would probably tell you, we're not gonna do this thing wholesale at one time. We're gonna kind of we're kind of inching into it more so than anything. So, but we do have things we've identified that needs attention probably.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that is going to be in the report that Barry we haven't talked about. So, I mean, and before I do a final draft, I tend to sit down with Barry and Barry doing those things. So I don't want to just, you know, read your report and say, okay, here it is, you know. So it's really, and again, I've treated this as almost, you know, not so much a consultant, but as very.
You're looking at it from a municipal end, with your municipal experience.
And so I think, in a lot of things that Barry told me going into this, you know, as I go through it, I see them, you know, those are things that need to change. And let me say that it's not unusual that you have a code that is amended over a 20, 30-year period. I mean, when I got to kind of, this code was the craziest code, because they took Northampton Township and Cuyahoga Falls, and they put them together. And so you had residential districts in different sections, and so in most codes from Northeast Ohio really go back to the 60s, late 60s, when there was money available from the federal government to do plans and model cities, and there were regional, now DEFCO and some of the other groups, that they had planners develop these codes for cities. And they date all day back. Marvin's dated back to that time, all day back. And I probably, if I did enough research, that your code you have, which is really the township code that I did, probably dates back to that same time, when they were getting codes done through the federal government, consulting cities do that. So and code is important because it really guides development. I always tell people that plans are great, they look nice, but you need to follow the plan up with the code, because the code is going to say you can do this or you can't do this, or you have to do it this way. And the way you get things done is by regulations. Someone comes in for a building permit, someone comes in for a zoning certificate, and they want to put an addition. These are the requirements. If they're wrong, then you have a problem. Either they go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, or something is built that probably shouldn't be built. So the code is really your foundation for development of the city. And so it's important that you get it right. And it also is a guide to how you want to do it, or if you don't want to do it. You know, it does those things, because when a developer comes in, or someone wants to build something, is if there are regulations to do it. Something they want to do that we've all discussed, this is how we want to do it, and a developer comes in and wants to do something different, then you can say, well, go into the code. That's how it should be done. And so, and developers do that too. If you have a code that's not very good, they'll work the system. So it's just the way it is. It's just a game that play. And not that developers are bad, they want to make money, they're doing things good for the community in most cases. But you just have to make sure you do things the correct way, the appropriate way. And that's what the code is for, if it's not. And that, the very said, it looks as though the best way to do this is in phases. You don't have to do it in phases. It probably is. I like doing things in phases because it's difficult in approving in phases because you sometimes have two codes at the same time. You're trying to, so you have to make sure you do space, put it in the existing code, then when everything's done, you put it into the format. So administratively, it's a little bit more difficult than just giving everybody a new code and saying this is going to replace this. But it's hard to do things. I think when you're doing a new code, it's important that you have a oversight committee, the people that review chapters, review sections. I think that's very important. In both Farmington and Cuyahoga Falls, we have committees made up of council people, planning commission members, boards of citizens, business people, and we met monthly. You went through things, changes, you made the changes, it was reviewed, we talked about that, you made the change. So it's sometimes a tedious process, but you want to get it right. So, any other questions? All right, I'll ask you guys questions now. These are real easy questions, I think, and some of the questions are the same ones that I've asked everybody in the neighborhood, and so. And we can digress a little bit from them, but they're just basic questions. And the first question I have is, what is your opinion of the zoning code?
I think it certainly needs updated. That Barry and I've gone, I know, on a few different things over the years. Property maintenance, I know, is a touchy subject, but that's a huge complaint that you get that done. I could go either side. It's tough. It's a tough area
We go through it the last, it's been years ago, but it was pretty expensive. How long ago? I can't even remember.
Probably 13 was it, but I don't know if it was ever a full-scale revision.
But it was, I mean, there was a lot going on. at the
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
The agricultural.
Yeah, well, that's, yeah.
It was around 8 and 9.
Yeah, probably was, probably in
So
response
that
to
was some
that.
time ago, but there were some significant things that went on during that period. There was a lot of, because agriculture is big in this city. I mean, it's different than, when people say city, they think about cattle, crops and stuff like that, so that's always been an issue, I think, is how we address our agriculture, because you can't do the same frontage on that as you can somebody in a lot like that. So I think that was some of the stuff that was big issues back then, but it really did, we could fill this room full. There's a lot of people that were farmers in that, so I think that's always sensitive on how we address certain issues, separate from agriculture. Some people are like not even actually an agricultural district that are doing some things that still allow them, so.
Yeah, I've read the agricultural section, it's pretty comprehensive. And what we'll look at is how that's, and sometimes it's organization too, how the code is organized. So if you're looking at something, where is agricultural, and so we're gonna look at, sometimes things might not be, you wouldn't change the text of it so much, but it might be better if it was in a different section, it made it easier for the public to find it and see how it links to other things. And that's what the codes are. They're important that they're not only comprehensive, but they're easy to use. They correspond to another section. And I had a question to follow up on that. What about like agribusiness? Is that something that you think would be of interest here? And I mean by agribusiness would be, orchards, farm markets, maybe wineries.
We are starting to see that now,
Yeah.
so.
And I'm for that, if it's in where it needs to be in the right areas. If I have a problem with that, I mean, it can't be in.
You're seeing more of that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Obviously, you can't have it back in, Jim.
Yeah.
Probably not have it.
winery you got.
Yeah.
One thing we do.
But so as long as that's, yeah, I'm all for it.
Well,
the reason why I asked, when we were doing the code in Cuyahoga Falls, we were involved in National Park, we had so much land. And they had this thing called the countryside program, which they would then lease out farms. You know, the big thing was we had on this land, we had people accepting years and years. But then they started leasing out farms, like goat farms, and so when we did the code for that Northampton area, we separated the rural, urban, and suburban, and we allowed agribusiness based on what the national park said. And I think it's worked out pretty good. And you have to live on the site, you have restrictions of what you can do and what you can't do. So you can't say, oh, I'm gonna buy this farm and I'm gonna ship in grapes from Chile. You know, and I'm gonna make wine. You know, you have to grow it on site, and you have to make wine at a certain percentage. But if that's something maybe that you could look into.
A couple of questions on that line. If you're not growing from, but you want to use old agricultural buildings, there's a little bit of a discussion about buying old barns and turning them into wedding venues. I have no idea how that could fit into that. Another issue that, well, two things I want to touch on. One, the property maintenance issue. One thing that I think was very glaring in the survey was the response to property maintenance requests. Respondents were asked to grade what were their concerns. So it wasn't a clear, I have no concerns, but when it was graded, an overwhelming majority felt there was a problem or concern. They felt property maintenance should be taken care of.
I think it's important, and we've talked about it, of how it's set up in the code. And I think it needs more discussion and more.
Absolutely.
When the code, I think it needs to be updated, how it is, and that's when we start revising the code, I think there'll be some special reasons and ways we might be able to do it that might be better than the way it is today.
So I may, well, Jim was on the property maintenance board for a while. You probably saw firsthand some of the weaknesses of that, and I think you guys put it on table it for a while, so we can maybe revisit that, and come up with a better idea. I mean, where we're at now is we refer stuff to law, and then we have to file lawsuits and stuff, where other communities don't do that. And that's been my big beef for 20 years, that there's gonna be a way to get from point A to point B more efficiency, more efficiently, and cost the city a lot less money to do this kind of stuff. So Fred and I talked extensively.
Well, I guess I'm a little confused. I understood your, the scope of your work to be just basically taking our current book and making it more intelligent as far as the way it's laid out, and that it's not duplicated here, in many different sections, or it doesn't say one thing and then contradict itself in another area. As far as adding things or making changes to the zoning code, as far as adding agribusinesses or redefining property maintenance, which obviously needs to be worked on. But that's not really the scope of your work at this point, correct?
No, I just like to know, as I start making recommendations, and it's something for you to decide.
Okay.
If you start redoing the code, and you look at that section which is supplemental uses, and where the agribusiness is in.
Right.
You could say, well, agriculture, you could say, well, we like agribusiness, and so you could change that to allow that in certain
Right.
situations.
So our first step is just getting a real usable book, zoning code book that then we can then go through and say, okay, now we're in the agricultural section of it. How do we improve this, or what do we do now that we have all the information all under agriculture and not
probably what's gonna happen, no matter, whatever, is that you're going to, if you decide after this you want to update the code, there's gonna be a systematic way you're gonna do that, and everybody will,
Right.
agree on. And then, if you do it in phases, you're gonna say, we're gonna take this section of the
Right.
code now.
now that we can see it and understand it?
You're gonna have a committee, and you're gonna
Right.
have, okay, you're on this committee, you're gonna review, we're gonna talk about it, there'll be a draft put together, you're gonna review it. Everybody agrees on that draft, then it'll go through the normal situation where there's a public hearing, there's a planning commission, the planning commission approves it, if they do, then it goes to city council for approval, and then that section is updated.
Right.
And then you go to the next section, it's important. And so there'll be a hierarchy
Right.
of what's important. And so.
But we just need that good base to work off of.
Well, yeah, you're
And
gonna,
that new
yeah. and
organization.
Yeah, and I'll go, so that's gonna be probably one of the first things you do, is say, this is how we want this code organized.
Mhm.
And even though you're not gonna approve it in phases of that organization, but it'll be an organization that has codes, as you start doing things, they'll go in that.
Right.
But I think as you're looking at this, you're gonna comprehensively look at it, and you're gonna say, well, maybe we don't like this.
Right.
Or we think it should be changed.
Right.
And then you'll look at that and say, okay, I agree with that. But it's a long process, but it's a lot of give and take.
Sure. Sure.
And I was just asking that question because you asked about agriculture, and I just, light bulb went off because we talked about that when we did ours. And I think it's worked out. There really hasn't been a lot of change in that. It really just helped a lot of farmers do things, which is somebody coming in there. We had people with strange ideas, but they read the code, no, we can't do it here. Who asked about the wedding venues? Oh, okay.
I did, and I had a little bit more to that too. Go ahead.
We actually have, there's an architect that's, George Winkleman, who owns a big wedding venue in the national park. It's, I can't remember, the farm, and he does really well. The only thing you have to do is you have to be a little bit careful on that, of traffic and parking and noise. And so I think it's a good way to protect these barns that are there, but you just have to be careful, that's all.
So is he required to live there?
No.
So that was a big key.
It was there prior to the code.
Okay, so you had mentioned that as a piece of it, as a supplemental use.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting concept that you mentioned with requiring somebody to live on property if you're gonna have, we want to support our residents, not necessarily people coming in.
We could have employees, but it's limited.
I got the impression you didn't live on, if you had animals, yeah,
Right.
was the impression I got, as opposed to a venue for a party scene.
Yeah, or a vineyard, something like a vineyard, or what you described up there was a farm. You had animals,
Yeah.
farm animals in the park. Now, was that a park requirement, or was that a city zoning code?
It was our zoning code. I have to look at the contract that the national parks had. But I believe, I believe there was something similar to that. Because we sort of looked over their requirements and said, okay, this works. There's, 60% of this area is in the national park. Yeah, but people don't realize the national park, I didn't realize it was called national park. They don't own all the land. It's just a border. It's a district that Congress approved. So there's a lot of private owners there, and it still is, and so it allowed them to be able to do things similar to
Did the federal regulations override the city stuff? I mean, if Uncle Sam said you can do this, was there a conflict between the city and Uncle Sam?
there could have been, we haven't had it, you're right, they could, well, they have to open the land. I don't know about the boundaries of the park district. But again, we worked hand in hand with them, and they agreed to what we were doing. And I think that's what you want to do when you do these codes. If it's going to be something that potentially could be a little bit controversial, or there could be some issues, you want to bring those people to the table and work out something. But it was a win-win. They liked what we were doing, and we liked what they were doing, and so we had to have a set of regulations. And there is actually a vineyard across from Blossom Music Center, Sarah's Vineyard. And we've had a little bit of problems with that. We had a little bit of problems with building things without permits. And because it's national park land. although the national parks are pretty good, when they first started doing things, they don't hold permits with the national park, you know, they hold permits. And so you're right, so that issue was an issue.
I have one last thing I want to slide in here, Father, and then we can get moving on. Airbnb, would that be considered a supplemental use under your thought process?
I don't know, I would think about that, you know, it's some problems, there's some legal issues involved in that, so we can bring the law director in. There's some issues that are still out there that haven't been settled.
Because that wouldn't fall in the same type of, okay, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, because technically somebody can do that. So I mean, I think, that's an issue that I need to make a note of that. It's not for now, it's what.
We don't have answers,
Yeah.
there have just been questions posed.
Sure.
So that's why I'm curious.
I think that's under debate in Columbus, isn't it? The Airbnbs right now too, I believe, so.
Any other things, if you have issues with zoning or things that were good, and Barry's a great guy and he's doing everything, you know, or something you don't understand about it. Anything?
I think the only other thing, things that are two things that come up with me is, property, and then, but I think it's already been rectified probably a couple years ago, the garage, additional garage size. Is that up to 1,000 square feet?
That's 1,000 square feet,
And we
2
upped it.
acres or less.
And then, yeah, and that was what, 900 before?
Went from 800 to 1,000, right?
Okay. All right. But yeah, I think we've already,
We talked about that, and it'll be more discussion, because you may want to look at that for really large agricultural sites, you know, without buildings or something, always like, but we've had discussions about that, yes.
I just have one thing to say. Speaking of Gary, I think Gary is one of the first zoning inspectors we've had, and correct me, gentlemen, if I'm wrong, but he really works with everyone. I mean, Gary really goes out of his way to try. And I appreciate that, and the fun, really the residents do too, but you do go out of your way to try. And I think that's really remarkable, because a lot of times people don't.
You get more done with honey than you do a clothesline.
They told me that. They told me that.
Yeah, let's move on. Any concerns or opinions about the subdivision code? It's probably one of those things no one really thinks about.
I'm
Yeah,
not
what
going
it
to
says.
say that, other than that, you know, it's a Summit County thing, that's really all I know about it.
It's a good code for Summer County. I just think that, my municipal background is, you're a city, you need your own code. You need something that's gonna work for you, not that just tells you how to dot i's and cross t's and get things done. That, because, you know, if you do have a new development, a subdivision, you know, there may be some things in there that might not be, appropriate for Franklin. So it's, I don't have any information, but you don't learn these things until you start reviewing them. And so, I think that, it's time to do it. You don't, it's probably not gonna be the highest priority, although there may be potential to use that document in the near future, so, and that's something that's further discussion, but, I think going through it is a lot of it. There's things that in the administrative section, it has its own administration section. Of course, it has a lot of trustee language and some kind of departments, but you also have an administrative section in the zoning code. So, you know, you have separate administrative regulations that may not be exactly the same in the subdivision code. So, you use those in the subdivision, and you use the zoning code. So there are issues like that. We also have two landscaping sections, one in the zoning code, one in the subdivision code. You have a section in the subdivision code about PUDs. You don't have PUDs in the city at this point. So it hasn't been used a lot, but I think that's not an excuse for not to have a code that's.
You know, I agree with you, because we don't realize the problems that are going to face us unless we talk about them. And then it's going to hit us right in the face, and then you try to change it, and of course, whatever had been applied for could not be under that new statute, because they would have applied prior to. So you're right, it is something that we really need, we would benefit from learning more about that.
So that's, and I talk about it, I'll talk about it in the report. And so, and again, once the report is done, it's, sit down with Mayor and Barry and go over it, equal before it's done, and so everybody has a clear understanding, and then you'll review it, and then decisions will be made after that. So,
One of my primary priorities in terms of the necessity of this kind of diagnostic comes from the reality of the fact that not to try to craft something for an intended purpose. I think you're going to see, from the comprehensive plan, we're going to see some input. That whole notion of a comprehensive plan was suggested to me years ago by the old law school professor, who said that when you get in citizen input and you create your zoning districts, and a developer wants to do something contrary to that, and you end up in court, it's not just the city's opinion as to whether that fits in that area or whether it doesn't. You've got another document that supports that. So that's what's going to come out of this comprehensive plan. We'll have that document. But as it relates to, and so this isn't about, can we get some subdivisions in here? This is, from my perspective, about if people come here and want to do subdivisions, what do you want it to look like? And what do you not want it to look like? Okay? And if all we have is what we have, we got a problem. Okay? Just because it's too generic. All right? And it didn't take too hard of a look at first in terms of, this isn't because of the golf course development. We started this process before we even knew there was going to be a golf course development. But what we did know is eventually there's going to be development. And so when we start looking at the potential of golf course development, we look at what we have on there, and it's, we've got terms that have there's a term of art, and we don't have a definition, and it refers over to the subdivision regulations and some county subdivision regulations, and it's a hodgepodge. And if somebody wants to come in and fight with us about that, that's a problem. And one of the things we all have to understand, I think you do understand that, is those fights don't always end up in this room, okay? They end up downtown, okay? And if you've got, if you don't have tight language in your code, your chances of prevailing downtown are not good, or at least they're diminished, put it that way. So that's really the flavor of it from my perspective on this.
I agree, Paul. We really don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
all right, thank you. So let's go on then. What about zoning enforcement? One thing that Barry was doing a good job, and anything else about zoning enforcement do you think we should be doing or we shouldn't be doing?
I'm talking with Barry numerous times about zoning enforcement. It seems that they're incorrect on there's like a lack of teeth in what we currently have to do enforcement.
That's
And that's one of the things I would think we want to address.
Definitely.
It's not necessarily the high grass, because everyone's got a kind of different definition of high grass, 8 inches or a foot or whatever. It's when you see somebody that's got a tarp shed in front of their house, or they've got 20 cars in their back that's weeds going through and everything else, or yeah, we've all seen those scenarios.
And we had a meeting last week, actually, and they were there themselves, and law director talking about penalties and enforcement. So it needs to be updated. Any other questions about zoning enforcement? Is there a pet peeve that people have that shouldn't be like this? You drive around in your ward, or why is it like this?
I think it kind of differs a little bit depending on what part of town you're in. You're getting more of the agricultural tractors and stuff, so that's just accepted. That's normal. You get in Jim's neighborhood, it's not. And I can still.
Because it's kind of
So that brings up a specific point. We've got 4 wards. 1 and 2 are sort of similar. You know, 1 is what you might consider a little more suburban. 2 is a little less suburban, and 3 and 4 are just about the opposite of that. And what most people, I think, would consider rural. The survey is going to give a little bit of feedback on what people's perceptions are of that. I'm new at this. It would be so nice if there could be a different code for those different types of areas, and I don't know if it could be by ward.
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna,
Yeah.
I was gonna, if we had different classes for how that zoning code is applied.
Well, I can give you a real life example. When we did the code in Cuyahoga Falls, we said, this is the first code since Northampton Township. We said, we have this rural area, we have this suburban area that was developed after World War II, late 40s, 50s, 60s, maybe a little bit in the 70s, and then we had this urban area that was developed in the 1800s, the downtown, that area. And so what we ended up doing, we separated the code into, we call them 4 planning areas. One was the central area, and we had a west and east suburban, and then we had the rural area. So what we did was we tweaked the code by what district we were in. And so, you had different regulations on the types of structures. You had, for example, the agribusiness, you had to have that in what we call either the NP1, which is the National Park District, or the RFR, which was the rural district, which was the same basically, or even national park, because it was a national designation. And so there were things you could do there, but you couldn't do, there were things you could do in the suburban district that you couldn't do in the urban district. So you could do something like that if you, when I look at, as my thinking about the city here is that you do have the lakes area, Manchester Road, Manchester Village area, which is historic. And so you could do something in that area that would be not urban, right? It's not urban, but you would have a designation of what you want there, how you want growth to occur. And then you go back into our 2 districts, which is suburban, basically, and you have some different regulations that allows for, accessory structures, allows for the type of housing, lot sizes, and then you go into where the R1 areas or the conservation, and you have a more rural area that limits a lot of growth there. And so we said in Cuyahoga Falls that if you're in the RR National Park, that's a no-growth area. It's very limited growth. There wasn't sewer or water there, so that helped. When you start getting water and sewer lines run out there, then you're running in place. These things are happening. So you protect those areas and growth, and you have to deal with what's there already. So you could look at something like that once you get started, if that's important. But if we did it works pretty good. When someone would come into my office and say, I want to build here, we say, okay, you're in a suburban area. You don't have to live by those urban areas that was built in the 50s and 60s. We're going to treat it that way, of what's allowed, what type of commercial building, whatever. So we let the land use guide us to how we address it, but we made everything look better.
You asked about peeves and enforcement.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I think brought some of this discussion up is, there's a farmer west of here and they've got 4 tractors. Maybe their house is on a 2-acre parcel, but they're attached to farmland that they farm and they use those tractors for what. And then you've got somebody on a 2-acre parcel on the lake and they've got 6 cars. That's not the same thing. And that's, I guess, what I think we would love to figure out some way to have some nuance to this so that, the people in these, you say subdivision, we have subdivisions from the 50s, the Mesilla Highlands and this area back here. Jim's neighborhood.
Thank you.
I can't live with those.
I don't want to get left out.
You know, they're different, and the flavor as you walk down the street and the way people maintain their homes is very different than when you're going out Minnesota Road, you know, down toward Clinton or, you know, any of these roads. There's a different feel, and I think that's a challenge to have a zoning code that doesn't try to get that guy for his 4 tractors. That might be a bad example.
I agree, and that's why we did that, the way we did it, because the simple zoning code, an R2 in a suburban area and an R2 in a rural area is different.
Correct.
And so it put this umbrella over that, how you treat things. And you're right, because, you know,
That's a nice word.
you treat in the same way with cars or recreational vehicles. You know, if you have a 6,000 square foot lot, it's different than if you have a 6 acre lot. You know, so you shouldn't be treated the same.
And hopefully it's not just based on your lot size, you know, I know that's an easier, but the character of the area, yeah.
And so those are discussions when the code starts to get modified or amended, is okay, if everybody agrees we need to treat that differently, then we need to say, okay, how do we do that? So let's stop everything and let's figure out to separate the city into 4 districts or 3 districts. And then you have the code is tweaked. And that was something I wanted to do in Cuyahoga Falls when I first got there. I said, you know, how do everything in Northampton's 1.5 acres. And I asked, why is it 1.5 acres? Well, because 1.5 acres is what you need at that time for septic. It used to be 1 acre. When we needed 1.5 acres, we changed it to 1.5 acres. And I said, well, okay, but you know, it has nothing. No, it has nothing. So we looked at that. And there were reasons why things were done at the time were important. But what it ended up doing is people going into these 1.5 acre lots or areas or subdividing into 1.5 acre lots. And the subdivisions were, you know, 90 by 300 or something. You know, so it was, and so you had to be able to say, okay, you can do this, but it has to be done. That's all. And so that's something that I'll jot down.
Are we, yeah, we're working against 6 o'clock.
Okay, let me quickly go through this. Okay,
And if we need to reconvene, we certainly can.
if-
Or do follow-ups.
yeah, or we could, if you want to call me, you know, you can do that too.
Or you can send us an email with all those questions, we can all respond.
Yeah, I can do that, I can put that together, yeah.
Or you can stay until after the meeting and we can continue after.
You can hang out in Jim's neighborhood.
Sound like both neighborhoods.
Come on, let him go.
Okay, what type of development would you think is appropriate for?
Yeah, it really just depends on the area. Yeah, because depending on where you're at in the community, some things may look great, some things may not.
And some things would be accepted and whatever.
Correct.
Okay, so,
Going back to the character, from character.
Right. And we don't have interstates, so, you know, it makes a big difference. We don't have any interstate access, we don't have any interstates at all. So that it's gonna change the demand.
and that's a follow-up question, I have later, if you want to ask it that, is that, you know, usually with the interstates, you know, industrial, you know, community or regional retail, you know, like what you have in Greenwood, you don't have that, which is a good thing. However, you know, a tax base is always important for a city. And so, you know, there could be some industrial, industry that you do want, for example. And you don't have, most of your industrial zone property is actually land links. And so you might want to look at you know, appropriate locations that are, you know, utilities that could be for some industrial.
Or are relatively close to interstate access.
Yeah.
You know, there's the Eastern Road
Yeah.
development.
So I mean, those are things that I observed, you know, and I'm not sure that, the landlord should be building industrial units, it should be probably a natural area. That we never see any developments, you know, in occupation, so, but yeah, at one time it was an industrial area, yes, it's a dumping ground, now it's not that. All right, let me move on. How about housing density? I think I know the answer, it probably is where it's located at. What about mixing uses on, and I'm just gonna throw this out, is areas of Manchester Road, instead of just retail. You had some townhomes, you had some senior housing. Is that something that would have some interest, if you'd be able to do that? Right now, the way retail is that this old corridor stuff isn't complete because of all the Amazons and, you know, buying things online. Is that people are doing more, I don't know if boutique shopping is the word, but they're going to smaller grocery stores, they're going to things that you're not going to get. You're not building those anymore. Shopping plazas are as big as they used to be. And so what's happening is that a lot of cities are changing their commercial districts to mixed use. They have restrictions on what type of residential developments you can have on it. So if you have a site, you have to put some retail, so maybe 8,000 square feet, and you can have some townhomes, you can have, and if that works, sometimes apartments, but nice apartments, not large apartments. So now you have more of a community that people that live in a townhome could walk to a restaurant. And so you have those type of
Yeah,
things.
I think mixed use is fantastic, it's a great idea, again, in the right situations, in the right areas. But to be able to have those little shops, so we have the employees, and then we have the residents, and a lot of those people will probably be working from home. So, you know, and being able to attract people to our community for that, you're not going to be attracting, you know, thousands of people that are going through a traffic jam, but you're going to attract people coming in, people going to the state park, you know, could come to those areas and enjoy those walkabout areas and stuff. I think mixed use is a fantastic opportunity in the right places.
Okay, it would be, I think what you want to do is take an area that type of Manchester Road, say it's never going to be all retail, because what you end up getting, if you only allow retail, you're going to get a lot of service uses, that potentially, you know, maybe a contractor's office, but there's a lot of contractor's offices, but they don't create a lot of outside for retail. And so you want to look, so when you get into that, when you do those, look at those districts, the C1, is maybe we want to allow some limited residential.
Senior housing.
Yeah, senior housing is something, but I want to be careful that doesn't get blanketed into this mixed use. I have some concern about the Manchester Road corridor. When I see green, and I see what's happening there between the Pickle Road Circle and the Maslin 619 Circle, you know, they're building this big apartment complex right up against the highway, with a trucking company behind them. You know, and then a quarter mile down the road, you got some beautiful older housing developments with 3,000 square foot homes. It is a very poorly thought through. I don't live in Green, but if you were to do something like that on Manchester Road, I think in 20 years you'd have a mess. It may look beautiful when it gets built, but it's not going to stay there.
I think what you have to do is you have to be careful with that mixed use district of what type of residential you have. And how many units can be created.
Well, and where they're at in, you know, we've got some industrial property, you know, we got, you know, Manchester Cooler, highway distributing, you know, so somebody wants to put some housing units close to that, that's different than being, you know, down here where you're kind of in this area where there's more residential and not as much commercial, you know, you got boat yards and there's a potential for conflict is what.
But I think you have to be careful. I think, you know, right now, we're not making the sausage yet. We're going to the areas eventually, but I think that, you're right, it's important that you get it right. And so, and what you allow and how, and that's why even the subdivision is if it requires splitting of property and maybe a public drive or a public road. And if you don't have a subdivision that mirrors what you want happening there, you're gonna have something that maybe, at the after it's done, the idea was great, it was.
Kevin, Julie, Andy, what do you guys think about this mixed use idea?
I'm really in favor of Paul. You and I have already talked about a section I think would be great. Nobody else has done anything with it, but I think it would be great. And I think it's an opportunity for us. But I think that is what we need right here.
For me, I think it just depends where it's placed and what kind of buffer you have between the residential homes around it and preserving the character of the people who live there. I don't want to say, yes, I'm for mixed use and have something go in that completely changes their neighborhood look.
Right.
You got finance?
You don't want to speak on it. I agree with everyone else. It just really depends on what it looks like.
Yeah, and the observation I make on that,
Necessarily.
I'm sorry, tell me if you're wrong, is the whole point is to, if you were going to allow it, what you're going to allow. And it fits within the conformity of what people have said they'd like to see, so it's kind of supported by the comprehensive plan, so that so there's a reason behind it, so that in the event, the wild event that the developer wants to come in and do something drastically different from that, there's something to support. You know, that's it, no, you're not allowed, no, here's why you're not allowed, because of A, B, C, and D. But you put in structure, you put in place those pieces so that you can dictate, you know, if it's gonna come, how, you know, what do you want and what don't you want. That makes sense?
Yeah, that's exactly.
I have to say, this conversation's been pretty good, and it would be probably good if we had another follow-up meeting just to continue on, because I don't know if we're gonna get the conversation with email.
All right, well, no, whenever you guys want to meet,
We could do it before the next meeting again if you.
yeah, you want to do it next week?
Well, 2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay.
That'll be a great meeting.
Not 2 weeks this time, because we're gonna show them. Does that extend you too long? I mean, I know you were looking to have your report done, but.
Yeah, I can hold off. The question really, I mean, I can hold on 2 more, you know, my goal is to get this done by the end of the month, but if everybody agrees, let's talk this out more. You know, it doesn't matter to me.
What's everybody else think about a follow-up meeting?
That'd be great.
Great.
If you want, you could even send us the
I
questions.
will.
ahead of
I'll
time,
send those
and that way we
questions.
can have some thoughts formulated on that.
I'll send to Barry, and Barry can get it out to everybody.
And we'll show up knowing and understanding a little more of what the
Yeah,
discussion,
and
you
that's
know.
why it was important when we talked about it, is that, and the mayor, you know, you need to be involved in this. You just don't want to get this report, what is this report, you know, what's going on? Is we want you involved. The involvement of stakeholders is one of the most important things in planning. You should get people involved. And not everybody's gonna buy into everything, but you know what's happening. You know, and if you don't buy into it, maybe you can work through some of the issues and change things a little bit. But and again, we're not ready to go yet. I'm just laying something out for you.
Well, we'll plan it 2 weeks from tonight, 5 o'clock.
Good.
All right.
All right.
You got about 2 minutes.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
need some help. Excuse me.
Yeah.